The broadcast is now starting and passive listening mode has been enabled for all participants. Please note that this workshop is being recorded and the recording may be shared with others. The participant list and chat are private, meaning only the speakers and moderator can see the messages and participants' names. Log out anytime if you do not wish to continue under these conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to a special edition of our mindsON RBQM workshop hosted by Syntegrity's MyRBQM Academy. And I'm Tamara, the Academy's operations manager, and I will be your host today. Our 60-minute webinar addresses the topic Audit Trials Exposed, Why They Matter for RBQM. The session will include live polls and engaging brainstorming activities to challenge and enhance your expertise. We will conclude the workshop with a question and answer session. Our speakers today, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, Nechama Ketan. Nechama is a recognized expert in risk-based quality management, audit trial analytics, and data quality in clinical trials. With over 8 years of experience leading an RBQM team in the pharmaceutical industry and deep expertise in data science and trial operations, she brings valuable insights and is known as a true wicked problem wizard. Keystroke. Keith runs an independent consultancy specializing in RBQM, issue management, metrics, and KPIs. In addition to his work for Syntegrity, he consults with other pharma CRO vendor clients and the Avoca Quality Consortium. Keith is known for his ability to explain the complex in an understandable way. Johan Pröwe, with over 45 years of experience as a biopharmaceutical industry professional, Johan is widely regarded as the go-to expert for clinical data management and RBQM. Organizations appreciate him because of his implementable management strategies that help study teams identify critical processes and data, assess risks, and focus monitoring resources on the sites and activities where they are most needed. Just jumping too quick, sorry. Okay, and here's a brief introduction to the handling of this webinar platform for all those who are new to our workshops. Later in the session, I will activate a toolbar for you. You will see it on the left side popping up. Then click on the icon with the mug and the pens. Select the T in the box and open a text box. Click anywhere on the whiteboard, type in your ideas and click OK to submit, and your input will appear anonymously on our whiteboard. We will also run polls, giving you various answer questions. And if you have any questions or comments on the topics that we discuss here today, so please use the chat box on the right side and select the tab moderators to send us your messages, please. In a moment, I will also share some quick troubleshooting tips for the audio connection in the chat to help ensure the best user experience. Okay, that was it from my side. Thanks very much for your attention. And with that, I would like to hand over to Keith, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamara, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So the focus is on audit trails, and this is one of those cases where I feel very fortunate to be in this role because I'm learning a lot myself today, and it's given me a chance to do a little bit of research into an area I've heard a lot about, but didn't know that much about. And one of the things I will say that I've learned early on is how easy it is to talk about audit trials as opposed to audit trails. So that trials versus trails, because of the world that we live in with clinical trials, is so easy to get confused. So I may well say audit trials, I mean audit trails. So that's our focus for today, audit trails, and how can they be used, and all the opportunities that they give, but some of the challenges too, and hopefully some solutions to some of those challenges as well. So we start with a poll. How easy is it to access audit trails for review in your systems? So you can see the responses there. Hopefully, I'm going to let you select an answer there, and then we'll share. Great, thank you. So hopefully you can see that poll. Yes, so we've got B and C are the most selected responses. So fairly easy, available for some but not all, and not easy but not difficult. So those are the two. So and in fact, yeah, I'm not sure. Fair enough. I can understand that. I'd probably be in that situation. Easy, readily available. We've got none actually saying that it's difficult or not possible. So it's it's sort of in the middle somewhere is what most people seem to be saying, which is fantastic news actually. So they are available mostly and so can be used. Great. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So a bit of background that digging around, I've managed to find. I mean, of course, number one, we go straight to E6R3, and actually audit trails, there's a glossary term for audit trails, which you can see here. So it defines what they are, and it says the audit trail should show activities, initial entry, and changes to data fields or records, by whom, when, and where applicable, why. So that's actually a rather nice, simple definition. I thought that's quite useful. And you know, why do they matter? It's really about that idea of being able to trust the data. So reliable data that can be used to make reliable decisions, so that it's traceable, it's reliable, and it's secure. So those are, that's E6R3's take on it. There's a little bit more from E6R3 in a moment. Where should audit trails be available? Well, of course, there can be many places where audit trails are available. These are just some examples. Often they have an E at the start of them. So we've got EHR, electronic healthcare records, electronic medical records, that's sites, eSource, EDC, ePro, eCOA. So those are sort of front end, but then also potentially back end data management systems like CDMS, CTMS, and so on. So potentially lots of places where you can get hold of audit trails. And I presume that's why a lot of the responses we saw to that survey a moment ago were, a bit of a mixture. So some perhaps are easier, I'm sure, to get hold of than others. And some are probably more useful than others, actually. So are we required to have audit trails? I'm sure you know the answer to this, or of course we are. I've pulled pieces out here from various places. So here we've got E6R3, so clearly required from E6R3. Of course, 21 CFR Part 11. This EMA guideline, so this came out in 2023, and there's a lot of information in here and guidance around audit trails and audit trail reviews, which if you haven't seen, that's definitely worth taking a look at. And there's also the MHRA is another one I found on data integrity guidance and definitions. So there's no question that audit trails are required. So that's audit trails are required. Okay, and let's have audit trails, that's fine. But then what about audit trail review, which is of course what our topic is today. It's not just about audit trails themselves. And so again, I've pulled a bit out of E6R3. We have this in E6R3, a review of data and metadata. So procedures for review of trial specific data. And here we have audit trails and other relevant metadata should be in place. And I think this is interesting too. It should be a planned activity, and the extent and nature should be, there's a surprise, we see this all the way through E6R3, risk-based, adapted approach to the individual trial and adjusted based on experience. So it's, again, it's really quite specific in E6R3. Nakama, it looks like you've got a comment.
Yeah, so I just have a comment for the audience to think about. When they say a planned activity, what is necessary to enable a planned activity? And Keith, I know you've come from a process background like I do. Can we just spend like a minute to kind of dig into this for a second? Is that all right?
Cool. Yeah, go ahead.
So, and we haven't scripted this, you guys, so should be fun. So in order to be planned, you need to plan what kind of analysis you want to do, right? And then you need to be able to have your data accessible in an automated way. So when you asked how many of you could get access to your data, my second follow-up question would be how many of you can get access to your data in a place that lives near your analytics and where you're doing your analysis? And is that an automated or is it a one-off? Someone can email me my audit trail. So I don't know, Keith, if you want to, kind of double click on that, but it's I think it's important. It's not just, I once a quarter at the end of the trial, I look at my audit trails. This is the implication here, is that this needs to be done on a regular basis. Real time gets thrown out, but nobody does anything real time, but close, a regular planned activity, not just a, oh yeah, it gets planned at the end of the trial and we'll look at it and we'll go through heroic efforts to get our data put someplace. Johanna,
Yeah, I would like
would
to add a couple of real life examples to it, because you said, different people may have to have different kind of access to the audit trail data. And actually, someone from pharmacovigilance, for instance, may have to have access to the audit trail data right away, almost instantaneously, while someone else, maybe a clinical data manager or so, they may look at these audit trail data on a bi-weekly or monthly basis, depending on the kind of question. But the audit trail is a tricky beast, because inspectors, can go into the audit trail of an EDC system. They can take a look at, by when could someone in the company have known about this serious adverse event and what were the actions that they took or did not take. So I think the audit trail was not really looked at well in the past, but I recommend that organizations do that more regularly and be really careful with, in particular, safety data.
Yeah, it's safety data, but even there, I was on a different panel in the fall with someone from a European regulatory agency, and he said, interestingly enough, that one of the things that he does is that he asks for the audit trail, and he knows that if it takes the sponsor 24 hours to get that data, then nobody's looked at it and he'll find things. Right.
Yeah.
So this is not theoretical. This is an actual, we need to know. So another example, real life example of where Audit-Trail would be interesting. And you could in theory do this with just straight IRT data. Do you have a site that's recruiting too quickly? Do you have a site that's doing bulk data entry? That might be actually something you only see in an EDC audit trail, that they go in and they enter all of their data at a very rapid pace. These are the kinds of questions that you can start to ask of audit trail, and you really can't get at that data, those questions, the bulk entry, without having that audit trail. Is there data that's been entered, 6 items on a form, 6 repeating items, 6 measurements, 3 of them entered, and then 6 months later, the other 3? That didn't happen, right? You know, these are all types of things that happen.
Well,
So
these are some of the advantages, of course, the electronic systems give you, aren't they? When you think about it, if it was on a piece of paper, it's much more difficult. So you may just not know. And I know a number of years ago, I was at a conference and there was Andy Fisher from the MHRA. And it's a graph probably everybody's seen by now, but he put up this graph and everyone groaned because it was, he said, well, I went into this sponsor and I looked in their ETMF. And I said, right, let's see the dates when the items were uploaded, because he could do that. And of course it was that, oh, can I draw it on here? That sort of that straight along, and then, oh, inspections notified, woohoo, and there's this sudden, you know, uptick of a massive number of documents being uploaded. So yeah, and that's a number of years ago. So
yeah. So just one quick added thing to sidetrack you, Keith, sorry. I think it's important to understand that the audit trail exposes the underlying process in the clinical trial.
Right. Great
And
point.
the whole point of all of this is to do process control and to understand the process under which the trial has been run, and that audit trail is the only way to expose the process at the site, or if you're doing TMF, the process at the sponsor. Audit trail is really the only way to see that process with the patients, with ePro, process with the physicians, with ECOA in general, and that you can't find those. It's very, very hard to find those types of measures indirectly through, let's say, the CRF data or the final data without the audit trail. So it's really important insight into the process.
And so the inspectors aren't trying to trick you or catch you out. It's more, you know, they can find out about the process through looking at audit trail data, metadata, and actually you should be anyway, but if you want to understand the processes and control and improve them. So I've pulled this out of that EMA guideline that I mentioned from 2023. So it's got some really good guidance around audit trail review, what they expect, that it should be documented, focus on critical data, although I know Johan may mention that a bit later. We'll see some examples where it's not just actually critical data, but this is what's in their guidance at least. An ongoing review is expected unless justified, are things I'd point out to here. But some good guidance there.
Yeah, I would suggest that anytime you see critical data, generally people in the RBQM space go, oh my God, okay, I only need to worry about critical data and everything else doesn't matter. With a modern analytics tool, you can look at everything. And when we think of critical data, you need to also put in your head critical process. So that critical process is going to come with a bunch of data that might not be critical. So what is the screening to enrollment process to first treatment process on a vaccine trial, right? Maybe some of that process is going to show up in the audit trail, and it won't be necessarily just critical data, but the critical process is really key. And it's those processes that lead to endpoints and compliance.
Thanks, Akama. Great points. So there is this document. This is another one I'd point you to from the ACDM, Getting Started with Audit Trail Review in Clinical Trial Data. Available online. You can download it. If you haven't come across it before, I think it really is a good resource. Lots of really useful information, suggestions, examples in there. One of them that intrigued me, this comes directly from that paper, is this here. They're showing essentially that audit trail review is a method of detection, of detecting emerging issues, of detecting risks. They've got their risk statement, their impact, and then they're talking about scoring likelihood, impact, or probability, impact, detectability, and how might you mitigate that. One of the ways for certain risks might be through audit trail review. So linking it directly into the sort of the RBQM process, that risk adapted approach that E6R3 is talking about. So I thought that's a really interesting example. I thought we've got a whiteboard next. To ask you whether you've got examples, you might have examples yourself, or you can think of some perhaps of risks or issues that audit trail review can detect or might be able to detect. So to write on this whiteboard, as a reminder, you go over to the left of your screen, and there's should be a little cup with tools that says tools underneath it. And we click on that, and then click on the T in the box, and hopefully you can write on the screen. If you have a problem with that, feel free to put something into chat for the moderators, and we'll pick that up and be able to type it in. Yes, a falsification of data, of ePro data, is in this example. Yeah.
When you say falsification, could you, whoever put that in, can you expand on that? Do you mean ePro data filled in by not a patient, or do you mean something else?
I mean, there's examples of that. I've seen examples of that. Yeah, where it's been filled in by essentially the
site.
device has been kept by the site, and yeah. Oh yeah, ETMF filing timing. Yeah, that Andy Fisher example,
Okay.
the hockey stick graph. Yeah, I know. The time to query resolution at sites. Delay in SAE reporting. Yeah, so I suppose, Nakama, as you're saying, you can dig into what's happening in the process. I guess that's the fundamental thing here. What's happening in the underlying process? Yeah, backdating, whether there's some backdating going on. Yeah, who's accessing systems? Absolutely. So team members perhaps accessing but not being trained, or not being trained on that study.
The data changes after STV, maybe also that goes to data changes without queries.
Mm-hmm.
There was no query on the data. Why are we changing it?
All right. And I think we might have an example of that from Johan in a little bit. Yeah, duplication of documents in ETMF. Yeah, deleting of data. So not just changing, but deleting of data in EDC, and how often is that done? Blinded versus unblinded staff.
Critical.
Yeah. Sorry, Nakama.
Well, I'm thinking also particularly critical data, right? So when critical data, inclusion, exclusion, data that would feed inclusion, exclusion criteria like medical history gets deleted.
Yeah, why on earth would that happen? Yeah. What's
Well,
the
when it
underlying
happens,
process?
it's a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. These are great examples. Thank you. Well, I think, Johan, you've got some more examples for us, right?
Yeah, actually, I really liked all of these examples that we got, and I'm pretty sure that there are 625 additional ones that people can come up with if they got the time to do that. So that's really interesting to see what you can do with the audit trail and what the audit trail data provide you. And yes, Keith, as you said, I have a couple of examples, and there's a disclaimer. This is just a couple of examples. Don't think, that this is a comprehensive list of all the things that can happen. But I think it's important to make sure that you understand what you can look at, and then you need to think about what does that mean. Again, this risk-based approach, is that a one-off, Keith, your favorite, or is it affecting an entire site, or is this for the entire study? So always keep that in mind when you look at certain data. So before we go into a couple of examples, let's talk a little about the challenges associated with the audit trail review. For the majority of the data, one would think that there is an access to the audit trail data, but in reality, that is not always the case. So we must distinguish between, yes, there is an audit trail, and there is access to the audit trail data. And what you should keep in mind is that if you really have a large study, the same is true for smaller studies though, but if you have a large study, the audit trail data are about 5 times, 6 times the volume of the data that are the original data. And all the rest of the data are data changes, SDV flags, investigators signing off certain pages, data managers posting queries. All this stuff is in the audit trail, and therefore the audit trail can grow really, really huge. Nechama, a comment on that?
Yeah, and I would argue that if you don't have automated access to your audit trail, you don't have access to it. If it's not automatically going into your RBQM or your analytics tool, you don't have access.
Yeah, but in reality, sorry to say that, in 2025, I saw that happening, that there is no complete access to the audit trail. And that's could be a concern, just to be aware of that.
It's very common.
Yeah, it shouldn't happen. Okay, second one is incomplete audit trail data. So there is an audit trail, but only the last change is available, and everything that happened in between, and I'll give you an example what the impact could be, everything in between disappears. So it's only the original record and the last record. Everything in between is missing. I've seen abuse of user ID and password. So I have seen data from a monitor, from monitors, plural, that use the investigators' user ID and password to do mass data entry. That's difficult to detect, but one may find ways to detect it. There is.
Let me back up, double click on that one for a second, you guys. When we're talking about usernames being either site personnel who are sharing passwords is another one that happens, as well as this someone using a site ID, a non-site person. This is where we really need to get smart and start talking to finance. Financial industries have sorted out how to detect fraud, and there are a lot of standard models we should start to be thinking of as an industry.
Yeah. So this one is not that difficult anymore, because what usually happens is they enter the data and sort of with a mouse click they pretend that they SDV'd the data. So you see user ID and password of the site, and you see user ID and password of the monitor in that case shortly thereafter, and then switching back, and that's something you can detect.
You can test for it, yes, if you build the analytical systems.
Yeah, and the other example here in this case is that some companies have something called permissible clarifications for EDC systems, or type 1 error correction permissions, which means that a monitor at the site could correct spelling errors, which is okay, I think. But if they abuse that for mass data entry again, you will be able to see that in the audit trail. That's the beauty of the audit trail. In some cases, there's lack of expertise, and I think that's what Nechama was referring to also. You need to know what you're looking for. If you have no idea what the audit trail entails and what you can get out of it, then it's really difficult to start using the audit trail data. Sometimes there are integration issues and extraction issues, which means in particular, if the volume is huge, then and this is, I think, the next bullet point as well, that there is just this huge amount of data that you need to, in some cases, break down or subset or look for the critical data only. And it is time-consuming, IT resource-consuming. So yeah, one can do a lot of things with the audit trail, but you also have to be sure that you have the sort of the hardware available.
But I would say that, just go back for 1 second, Johan. I think this is a place where Syntegrity can really meet a need, because you can feed the data in to your API systems, and then you can set up the checks and the statistical checks.
Yeah.
And then once it's set up the first time, it just runs.
Yeah,
it just runs, and it can keep running. There isn't a need to do this. You cannot do this manually in Excel. You need to leverage modern tools with data checks and partner with loose integrities of the world to build these into your RBQM solutions if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nakama. So a couple of practical examples, and I said, just a couple. So if you are new to the Audit-Trail review, then I think you should try to familiarize yourself with such a simple process, which of course is high level. And this is based on the ACDM paper, Getting Started with Audit-Trail Review in Clinical Trial Data. So you look into the applicable regulatory guidelines and resources. You review the SCDM, ACDM, eClinical forums points to consider. And these papers are really, really helpful. I enjoyed reading those because they give you a different perspective of the clinical trial and the clinical trial data. And then the considerations during the phase of a clinical trial. So you plan it, you conduct it, and you close it out, because you cannot just run, an audit trail review or analysis and then let it sit there. You need to do something about it and come to conclusions with what is it that I can do with it. Practical approaches and advice for implementation is in there, and then examples of finding and future steps for ATR, so the audit trail review. So this is the first example. This is an example on the number of data changes to data fields. Here on the left upper corner, you have the folder. It's all about adverse events. You have a form. This is all adverse events. And then you have the different fields. This looks like SDTM, at least it's close to SDTM. And you see that, for instance, the adverse event end date got changed 1,220 times. And the second most common was adverse event outcome, 1207, and so on and so forth. So you can just run an analysis. And as Nehama said, you set this up once, and then it can run in the background because it's always the same. And as long as you standardized your database structure, then it just cranks out one analysis after the other, and you can see whether you need to be concerned or not. And then the number of data changes per data point. So one change, so this number is the indicator, one change is 1,100 to 66 cases. But you go down into this area of 4 changes, 5 changes, 6 changes. Why would someone change a data point 6 times or 5 times or even 4 times? So those are the cases that one should take a closer look at, because those cases are suspicious. And in RBQM, you create a key risk indicator, or you can use a centralized statistical monitoring approach, and you look for any fields in your EDC system, in your entire database actually, for any field that had more than 2 corrections, and then look, is that at a particular site? Is that at a particular patient? Or, where does it happen? And systems offer this opportunity to take a look at it.
So I found an interesting example of this, a couple interesting examples. Once there was a site with a huge number of changes on a data point, like 30, and it turns out that there was a problem with how the EDC was programmed.
Mm-hmm.
And the question required a date in the future, and the auto query required a date in the past, and so it kept cycling back and forth. And then they needed to do a post-production change and fix it. So you're not just catching site behavior here. Sometimes you're also capturing issues with the
design.
Well, you can be with your EDC design. The other example where we also saw a ton of data changes and on fields that should never have changed involved a lab data where they had to go back, and it also involved a post-production change, and the post-production change on that lab form caused an inordinate number of data changes on other pages as well that were non-obvious, like 30 changes. And so the only way to determine what actually happened was to have a conversation with someone who can go figure out what's going on at the site, right? You can't tell it from data. And I would suggest in the statistical engine, not a KRI, only because in only Audit-Trail, you can come up with 50, 100 checks, and you can't have that many KPIs and manage them.
No.
And that's where statistical
Yeah.
engine will help you.
Absolutely. I fully agree. Okay, so this was the first example. Then I have a second example where, I talked about that already, the so-called permissible clarifications or type 1 error corrections, where the data entry is supposed to be performed by the site staff, the investigator, study nurse, or anybody else at the site. And then simple corrections may be done by the site monitor, for instance, for spelling errors or date errors. We always saw that around January, February of a year, that all of a sudden they entered the prior year. And of course, you could build in an edit check to catch those issues right away, but not for spelling errors. So the mass data entry must not be done by the site monitor. And again, it's worthwhile to take a look at, and as Nechama said, using centralized statistical monitoring, not necessarily a key risk indicator, to look at the number of data changes that were done by others than the site staff. And then you can create an alert. So either you create a key risk indicator, or you look at centralized statistical monitoring, which is also then going to give you the numbers of the sites that stand out, or actually worst case, the name of the monitor that stands out, which could be embarrassing.
Wait, this is a very important point, you guys. In traditional RBQM, you're usually looking at sites and patients as a base metric, right? You're doing your analysis. How many times does this site do this or this patient do this? When you're doing Audit-Trail, you want to be able to look at monitors and site users, right? It's a different metric. Or even possibly in the other examples I gave, CRF pages, right? So you need to have a tool that allows you to do the analysis against different baseline metrics, basic different baseline dimensions, right? To use a more technical term, right? Because doing it by site doesn't help. If you've got one monitor who sees these 4 sites, you're not going to see it. But if you can cut the data by monitor, and I believe Syntegrity will let you do that, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's
right?
cool.
Or site user. It's really cool, and it's incredibly powerful. It's not just cool, it's powerful.
It's powerful, but it's also dangerous because, for instance, in Germany, and I don't know about other countries, but in Germany, you are not allowed to track down those issues to the CRA or monitor level with names. So
user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes, but not with names,
mask the
so
data.
that yeah. So just gotta be careful.
But again, that's where with the right data ingestion, you mask those names to an arbitrary name, and then you can't do it to name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and a third example, analysis of timeliness of data entry. So this is an analysis, or was an analysis of time between examination and entry into the EDC system, eventually pointing towards bottleneck sites for database lock. Because, everybody is looking for the database lock so that the statisticians ultimately can push the famous button and get their analysis cranked out. So in this table, what you see is the number of days between assessment and entry into the EDC system, the average. And this is days, not minutes or hours. This is days, 60 days, which is about 2 months. The minimum is minus 41. And you start wondering, how can that happen? But in some cases, there are sites that are really well organized. So they enter certain data already upfront, although the patient, had not even given informed consent. But in case they give, then all the data are already available. The scary part is this maximum here, 362 days. So a year later, they start entering the data into the EDC system. And these are similar numbers, the number of days between the initial and the final data entry into the EDC system. So you sometimes have pages that are being completed completely, and others where only partially the data are being entered. But again, the scary part is 347 days until the data entry is finished. And this is one example, but this is something that the audit trail tells you. Where are the sites that are really produce delays in the data entry? Because you need to focus on those, because in the end of the study, they are the rate limiting factors. So what you could do is, in this case, create a key risk indicator on delays in data entry, on site, country, and study level. So you could really track it down to where is the site that produces ultimately an issue for my database log. So those were 3 examples, real life examples, by the way. And I hope that you never see these numbers, the maximum numbers, because they are going to make your life miserable, because you cannot start your statistical analysis without having the data available. And with that, Nehama, I pass it on to you, because you have another section in our webinar with a couple of analyses.
All right, so now it's Keith and Johan's time to interrupt me. I have been involved in Audit-Trail analytics, both in my last role at a large pharmaceutical company and as well in leading an Audit-Trail working group, Audit-Trail analytics working group at the eClinical Forum, which is writing the second version of the paper that Keith and that has been shown earlier. So there's the 2021 paper. We're writing an updated version of that paper. If you're an ECF member, we can talk more and make that available. It should be available to ECF members soon. So there's a couple things that are necessary for Audit-Trail analytics to work, and as we've kind of structured within that conversation, there's kind of 3 big buckets. The first is what I call a clinical relevance or business context. You need to understand what are the use cases, what are the risks that you're worried about. So this is a classic RBQM question, right? If I'm worried about a particular monitor doing certain types of data changes, then I need to pre-process my data so that I can do that analysis. Okay, you can't just take this raw data set and query it directly. In most cases, the data is too complex to do that. Or if you do query it directly, you're going to end up with a different answer for each time you do it, and that's going to create some inconsistencies and problems. If you have one person programming logic in here and another person programming logic there, and then you change your mind on what that logic is as you understand it, then all of a sudden now you've got a environment where you can't keep track of what your metrics really are. So you need to understand what are the use cases and the risks that you're mapping to. The SCDM paper put in some information on that. The first SCDM eClinical Forum paper had a list of risks. The second paper will prioritize those risks and bring real examples where those risks have been what we call risk realized, right? So you have a risk that you're worried about theoretically, and then you have, oh yeah, it happened. Or I didn't know it was going to be a problem. It happened. So let me figure out what that realized risk is, because those really need to be tracked. And then understand the impact of it. Often the impact of Audit-Trail risks is dropping patients' data, which is kind of the worst possible outcome for a clinical trial, is to drop data. Why? You don't want, you're basically putting patients at risks unnecessarily. If you have enrolled a patient, the site has been demonstrated to have misconduct. Now that patient was engaged in a clinical trial with the intention of adding data to that trial and helping science, and that data all has to get wiped out because we don't believe it. So that patient was put at risk for no reason, and that's a really serious problem. It also costs the pharma companies a huge amount of money, right? If you have to extend your trials, remove patients. So that's the first part of it. The second thing is, and we've talked on this already, is you need automated data flow. If you don't have your data flowing automatically to your tool, and Syntegrity does a really good job of grabbing data, you need APIs, you need to grab that data, pull it across, and have it available and then pre-processed against those use cases so that you can start to have analysis that just automatically shows up. Yes, you can manually do this analysis once, twice, or 3 times. You cannot do it over and over again reliably, and you shouldn't be doing it over and over again manually. So make sure that your automated data flow feeds to your analytics. And then once you have found an issue, you need to then be able to do a workflow. Because as I said at ECF last year, analysis without a workflow isn't planned, just simply isn't planned, and it's not sustainable. The great idea of doing Audit-Trail within an RBQM tool is that you have the RBQM workflow, use it, right? You find a problem, write a signal, create an action, sync it to CTMS, follow up on it, all of those magical steps that you can do because you already have that in place. You don't need to build a separate system just for Audit-Trail. So if there's any questions from the audience, I haven't seen anything yet. Please go ahead and put those in to the chat because I'd like to make this interactive with not just me, Keith, and Johan, but any other questions. So what I wanted to do was double click on some of the thinking that I've been doing on the kinds of analytics that are going to be necessary to do Audit-Trail if that is of interest to everyone. And this is your opportunity to put in chat, no, go back and talk about something else, and I'll pivot. Okay, so I'm going to whiteboard for a second on a screen. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. Which screen am I sharing? One moment. Start sharing. 1 second. Screen 1. Share. All right. Can you guys? That is not my screen to share. 1 second. Stop sharing. Wait, can you guys? What are you guys seeing?
It's the calendar.
Yep, that is not what I wanted to do.
No, I guess
sorry.
that.
You guessed that, right? Yeah, let me do that again. Start sharing, screen sharing. Come on. Start sharing an entire screen. 1 moment. I know what's wrong. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to get this to work. You know what? I'm not going to get this to work. I'm going to talk to it in general because I don't want to waste time on tech right now. Okay. All right, we'll go back to the slides. Can you go back and put the slides back up? Thank you. Okay, so types of or you know what, you can throw up even the standard whiteboard that you guys use. So types of analysis that people are doing, if you start the whiteboard, whoever can magically start it, then I'll draw on that. Or it's
the
started.
tool is
Perfect.
on. People can write here.
Okay. So I'm going to color instead, I think, and let you guys kind of watch. Can I draw with this? No. Okay, never mind. I'm just going to talk to it. Okay, so there's 3 levels of analysis that
you have in the tools, you have the option to take a drawing. That is the line above the box with the T. And then when you click on that, you can draw. First, turn off the pointer by clicking on it a second time on pointer, then on tools, please. And then you see the line below the circle.
Okay, the line before the circle, I'm going to hit
the drawing
line width.
option. Or you can also use the pen. That doesn't matter. It's both the same.
Tools. I got it. I got it. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. All right, so the first thing you want to do is, I'm just going to call it descriptive statistics, right? So you're going to take your averages, your means, your standard deviations. What are the values that, in fact, here I probably could just put in some text, right? So it's descriptive stats, your basic metrics. And descriptive stats are great. Which site has the most data changes? Which CRF page has the most variability in data entry timeliness? Which one has the most queries? These are really good, but they're point in time checks, and they're kind of what I would call traditional statistical analysis on a trial that you would do at the end of the trial. What they don't give you, which is really important, is a concept of when is the problem happening, right? So anyone who has done a, look at this, I can learn new tricks. Okay, anybody who has done a bunch of data on a clinical trial, what happens? You've got this over time, right? So you've got a whole bunch of time, and now you have some measure. And let's take a really simple measure, maybe number of data changes, okay? When the site comes up to speed, that data change, oops, sorry, I'm gonna color it here a little bit. Will come up. 1 second, let me change the tool so I just wanted to scribble, not draw lines, tools. It's the pen on top, right? Scribbles for me?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to do this. So let's say I've got now I had a high point right at the beginning of number of changes. Right here, it's very high, and then it comes down. Great, everything is fine. If I take the average of that, I might end up with a value like this. Cool. What does that tell me? Nothing. Okay, you guys, it tells me nothing. It tells me that the average is higher than I want it to be, which is down here. Great. But I don't know, did it happen? Is it happening now, or did it happen a long time ago? Right? Is the problem a current problem I need to do something about, or is it a problem that has happened again? What makes this even worse is that what you really end up in real life is that you have some metric, you fixed it, so it came down, then it came back up again, then it came down, then it came back up again, and it came down, and then it came back up. And if you have a concept of a limit, and so I'm going to draw a red line to say, like, what's considered an acceptable value. So let's say these are acceptable values here, and I'm worried about high numbers. I need to be able to differentiate between an average, which might be here, right? My average might be down here, or even if the average is up here, I need to know, when am I okay? Sorry about that scribble, right? Where is my average? When am I okay? Versus, wait, I have a region. I have a couple regions here, and if you can erase my green lines, that would be great while I'm doing this, and then I'm going to color again. Thank you. In red for a second, because what's happening is that I am worried about what's happening here. I'm worried about what's happening here, here, and here. And depending on when I catch it, right, I want to catch this problem right here. If I'm taking just the average, because this trial has been going on forever, it's going to be a very long time before I see this. So I need this time trend. All right. And the other cool thing about this is that this throws us straight into what's called process control. Process control has been around for over 100 years. There's an enormous amount of statistics and processes and systems and everything in place to do this. We just have to leave pharma clinical trials. In fact, pharma manufacturing has been doing this for 100 years. It's not even new to pharma, it's just new to pharma clinical trials. And when you look at a problem, so let's say you've got a problem that happened, it came up, it came back down. So you say, all right, I had a problem, I found a problem, let's say an ideal tool comes in and says, look, let's draw some lines, found the problem, I identified the problem, I took an action, the problem got fixed. Great. I found the problem, I fixed it, and we're going to start wrapping up in a second. It improved. Whoops, it got worse, right? I need to be able to show that over time. The last part of this question of what to do with this analysis is that once you've built these graphs and these charts, you very quickly have 50 charts times 100 sites. It's too many to look at. You need some additional AI, fancy analytics that a tool like Syntegrity can start to provide that says, hey, I've got all of these options. Let me come up with some way of figuring out which of the sites and which of the metrics are in particularly high risk and how to read, not necessarily read all of the graphs, but do some analytics across from it. So what I want you guys to think of if we come back is, yes, you have access to your audit trails, but is it automated? Okay. And is it automated to your RBQM tool? And can your RBQM tool then ingest it and do something with it, right? And so in some cases that automate it to the RBQM tool, that data might need to be pre-processed or post-processed once it hits the tool, depending on the tool, to make it useful. And then if you're putting it into your statistical monitoring, can you run those as analyses? And then the final thing is you need to do this within an RBQM workflow of some sort where you find a problem, investigate that problem. Nobody is going to query an audit trail. Nobody is going to send a straight site issue to the site and say, oh, you've got so many data changes on this and this and this based off of the audit trail and CTMS. Can you please explain it? Right? You have to stop and take a pause and do some investigation, and that's why the RBQM workflow is so important. All right, thank you, Keith. That's kind of, and Johan, that's kind of where we're thinking of in terms of these audit trails.
Yes, thank you so much. So just a brief summary you can see here. I mean, I've learned a lot myself today, so thank you both. So audit trails and the review of audit trails is required. We saw that right at the beginning. They're actually a method of risk and issue detection, and we've seen lots of examples of that today and had lots of discussion about that, which is fantastic. It can be, Nakama was very much making this point, it can be very time and resource consuming, and that's back to this idea of then plan it appropriately and make sure you've got the right tools and capabilities in place, which relates then to the next point, the automated data feeds and good analysis tools. And the trend data, I loved your example there, Nakama, and of course it's, we see this with KRIs, you can see what a KRI is now, but actually for a KRI, you want to see it over time. You want the trending data to see, when, if there is a problem, when did that problem happen? Was it from the start? Was it at a certain point, or has it improved, and so on? So that trend data rather than just averages. So thank you so much. Let's see if there are any other questions or comments from the audience. Do feel free to type something into the chat. If you select moderators and type something into chat. And Tamara, maybe in the meantime, I can just hand it back to you for the.
Just if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I think our contact information is probably on LinkedIn or someplace, or Syntegrity, and they can find us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, and the audience will in any case receive the recording here and also the slide deck. So many points we've listed how to contact us. Thank you. Yeah, I also don't see questions here in the chat. Okay, then let me please continue here as we come to the end of today's session. And I want to invite you to our next complimentary workshops. On Wednesday, June the 25th, we are hosting a mindsON special edition with Professor Dr. Kai Eckert from Mannheim Technical University. University. He is professor of AI, and also with Andrew Warrington. He is a senior industry advisor for healthcare and life sciences at Microsoft, and they'll explore responsible AI outcomes, validating performance, and protection trial data. So that on June 25th. The next is then on Tuesday, the 1st of July. Don't miss this episode number 6 of our Act on Quality by Design series. Centralized monitoring is about being proactive. Good. Let's check the chat again. No, still no question, no comment. Okay, good. Thank you very much. And also a big thank you to our speakers, Nechama, Johan, and Keith, for sharing their experience and insights. And of course, thanks to everybody here in our workshop for joining us and participating. And it was great to see you. See you very soon for our next workshops then. Thanks very much and goodbye from our side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thanks
lot.
everyone. Goodbye. And thanks, Nechama.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.